Hey, welcome everybody. Welcome to the Winning Momentum podcast with your host. That's me, Scott Sinclair. I'm excited to have a very special guest with us today, Larry O'Brien, leader of DGov3. Is that the way I say that, Larry?
Yeah, DGov3. Perfect.
DGov3, founder of Calian Group, former mayor of Ottawa, Canada. Larry, about 3/4 of our audience is in the U.S. So Ottawa is the Canadian Washington. It's a city of, I don't know, 1 million people, more or less.
Exactly. It just went over 1 million last year.
There you go. Best-selling author of The Ethical Entrepreneurship. We will be talking about that. A celebrated citizen and entrepreneur and a blockchain advocate. Larry founded Calian Tech. Larry, the first 3 pages of my notes are just your background, so you're just going to have to bear with me here.
Okay.
for the audience. Founder of Calian Technologies, which he took from zero to, I think it says, a $35 investment to a $200 million plus a year publicly traded company. Still listed on the Toronto Stock Exchange under the symbol CGY. Is that correct?
That is right.
Larry? And the company, yeah, we did that during the growth. Larry was CEO, chairman, managed 5 major acquisitions, an IPO, and organic growth into the U.S. and across Canada. And after retirement, Larry became the 58th mayor of Ottawa, where he says in his profiles that, well, not everything is like a business. I want to know more about that.
You're absolutely right. You'll learn lots more. Government is not a business. That is for sure.
Because I always think it is. I always think that a CEO ought to transition into that role relatively easily. But maybe you're going to tell me that's not the case.
You know the best way to put it before you carry on is in business. If I help you become better, if I work for you, if I help you become more successful, I by definition become more successful because you'll come back and help me at some point. It is just the way it works in business. In politics, I become better if I cut your throat, if I knock you off the table. Even people in your own parties, you're always competing with them. And so it's such a different mindset for a successful entrepreneur or an entrepreneur.
It's a zero-sum game mindset. It's a trading mindset.
To transition the governance. And you'll notice that a lot of the very successful politicians have never been in business, and they've never been and you sort of have to understand where they come from. But a lot of very successful politicians, whether they're at the federal level, the state level, provincial level, they only know how to work the game so that they can get reelected. And there's
what's interesting about what you just
special,
said?
But not many.
You know what's interesting about that is when I was younger and not so smart, used to put politicians on my board of directors in a public company to get the name recognition. And then after a couple of years, I just stopped because I concluded that all that politicians know how to do is politic, to create division and to create trouble where it doesn't need to exist. That was my experience, which sounds to me is exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, no, that's precisely what I'm saying. And now, don't get me wrong. There are certain politicians that have very clear views and very specific approaches to the world, and they're special, and they are good. And thank goodness that we have the occasional superstar that comes along that can understand politics and has a specific drive to make the world better. But they're few and far between, and we, the citizens, don't have a lot of voice in what's going on, and that's part of what I'm involved in with.
That's part of what we're going to talk about today, for sure. While mayor of Ottawa, Larry was able to push forward some major development projects, including a light rail transit system, which was completely unique to Ottawa. Ottawa, I used to live there, Larry. I don't know if you remember that back in the day, but completely a bus city, very much bus focused. And Larry came up with the light rail transit system, developed the Shaw Center, which is a trade show facility, redeveloped 40 acres of basically, I don't want to call it wasteland, but now known as Lansdowne Park. Is that right?
Lansdowne Park, Ottawa? Yeah. It was 29 acres of parking lot.
Oh, it was 29?
29 acres of parking lot that we redeveloped into something spectacular. It's now a center hive. It had been a center hive of Ottawa for 100 years, but it had deteriorated to the point that it was just a parking lot. And
Right.
so we worked with. It's a first major municipal program in Canada of that size and that magnitude that didn't ask for a single dollar of federal or provincial money. The corporation of the city of Ottawa, we partnered with 3 corporations to make this happen, and we put this into a 99-year leaseback. And so this is unique. This was
and that was the early days of public-private partnerships, I assume.
Public-private partnerships are normally done at the federal level or the provincial level. They're seldom done at the municipal level. And
right.
As a matter of fact, municipalities in Canada, for your American viewers, they're creatures of the province. We have very little flexibility in what we do. We have what they call the weak mayor system in Canada, where the mayors have to have all of the councillors or all of the assemblymen on their side to get something done. So it makes it really awkward for someone to get a major program through. But somehow through chaos and concentration and a lot of other things, we were able to get those 3 major projects done. And they had been sitting there. They were the low-hanging fruit for about 25 years,
Absolutely.
But no politician wanted to do it, because every time you do something significant in a city, you're going to make enemies. And if you do 2 or 3
political death,
things, your career is just about over, which is what happened to me. By the time I finished with those major programs, I had little bits of people all over the city that weren't quite happy with me, because if you lived in the Glebe, which is right beside Lansdowne, you didn't want any development. You wanted it to become a park, so they didn't like me. And there were a lot of people who didn't like the light rail program, and there was a lot of people who didn't like some of the other things we did. So
who did you follow? Who did you follow as mayor?
I followed a chap called Bob Shirelli, who's running again for mayor. Our elections are just coming up now.
Yeah.
And a very confident professional politician by the name of Jim Watson kicked the heck out of me using all the.
Oh, so Jim came in after you.
Yeah, Jim came in after me. He's a real good politician.
McGinty was before Shirelli.
McGinty was a provincial leader.
The brother was, but didn't he have a mayor? Or
no, I don't think they ever had a
no.
mayor. No.
Okay, but it was a family from on. Okay. Let's not dive into too much into
that's into the weeds, Scott. You don't need
Ottawa politics. Yeah. Well, just because I had a story about that, but it's not appropriate for a podcast, anyways. Larry was advisor to Prime Minister Jean Chrétien, where he sat on the Council of Science and Technology, also an advisor to Premier Michael Harris for Ontario. For our U.S. friends, that would be the same as a governor, basically, a state governor. Chairman of the Special Advisory Group on Information Technology, chairman of the Canadian Advanced Technology Association, which I think back in the day during the technology boom, that organization was a big deal, as I recall. Yeah. Author of the best-selling book, Ethical Entrepreneurship. If you're on the audio version of this podcast, you're not seeing me holding up the book, but I have a copy of it here. It's a terrific book, and as Larry says here, you can still buy
download it. You can still download it on Amazon. I don't think they've reprinted it yet, but you can download it for free on the Amazon Ethical.
For free? Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think it can be downloaded for free.
And it's Ethical Entrepreneurship by Larry O'Brien. Get a hold of that. And we're going to talk about that today. It's won a bunch of awards, and including the Queen's Jubilee Award, United Way Person of the Year, Technology Person of the Year issued by the province, Business Person of the Year issued by the Ottawa Board of Trade. Did I miss anything in this long and storied career?
I don't feel that old, Scott. But, I think yeah. And it's funny to hear you talking about that, Scott, because whenever you're active and busy and trying to do things, you don't even notice. You don't keep track. And but I think you hit most of the highlights.
And one thing I haven't really talked on, but we're going to get to that at the end, is your current venture in democracy and voting systems. And so I find that very interesting. And so, but we'll get to that a little bit later. want to start off, Larry, with
You did miss one. You did miss one thing, though. My
Yep.
first business before I started Calian was my 6-month MBA program, where I started a company in 1979, and I made every single mistake possible to make in 6 short months, and destroyed the company completely. Spent the next 2 years trying to figure out why someone as smart as I thought I was could screw up so badly, and realized that I was the problem. Took full accountability for every mess up. But in that process, I came up with all the material that I put down in the book that you just talked about.
in the book.
And
So that to me is a perfect segue to the very first quote I picked out of this book, which is that success has a lot to do with the right habits and the right frame of mind. It's really, you didn't say this in the book, but for me, it's not really about smarts at all and how intelligent you are. It's about the habits and the routines and the systems that you have put in place. Is that your thinking?
I think you're absolutely right, because it has to be a cohesive approach to running your business. And what I found when I sat and looked at my navel for 2.5 years after I failed spectacularly, and not just a simple failure. I went personally bankrupt. They towed my car away. I was living on a friend's couch. I mean, the really drastic kind of humiliating, have your nose rubbed in a pea kind of bankruptcy. And I spent 2.5 years studying, um, why that happened. And I realized I didn't have a solid value system to make decisions, because success
Right.
is not one decision. It's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of decisions made repetitively. And that's when you come into your habit. How do you move forward in a business? And by the way, before I failed, I was a physics, technology, chap. I worked for Nortel, helping design some of the first integrated circuits that were designed in Canada in the 70s. So my background was technology until I decided to jump into the business world. So, when I had my failure, it was the worst moment in my life, and it was also the best moment in my life, because it allowed me at age 29 to restructure my value system, and also
Right.
allowed me to realize I wasn't as smart as I thought I was. And you need to have a strong moral compass to be successful.
And these habits that you talk about that you learned, what are they that have carried through
I
to
still
today?
use them every day. It's I have these
Yeah.
4 values that I use to test decisions. Like, as a CEO, you're often going to, I'll use it at the CEO level. You're often going to be given a number of different solutions for a problem a company is facing, and often it's going to come from people within your organization. And you're going to you're the one who's going to ultimately make those decisions. So I had these 4 value tests that I applied to every decision that I made. And one was, be honest. And by being honest, I don't mean just telling the truth, because that's pretty easy for most people. Being honest, do you know the facts? Have you dug deep enough into the problem to understand what you're really facing with? Because most of the time when you mess up, it's because you really didn't dig deep enough into the topic. So have you or your people dug deep enough? So be honest with what you know about yourself and what you know about your organization. Think long term. This is a surprising one. Whenever I was given an option with a short-term solution versus a long-term solution, I always picked a long-term solution. And this is a surprising part. It always, and I mean always, produced the shortest term results, because it puts you on track with other people who are thinking long term. And when they say you're making the right long term decisions, when you put in an SAP system, when you're a $35 million company, the government looks around and says, those people want to do business for a long time. They're
They
going
want
to
to
be
be in
eligible
the
for doing
industry.
contracts with us.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So
They want to be in the industry.
yeah, they want to be in the industry.
So as I'm sitting around in my 1-year-old tier 1, tier 2 automotive manufacturer that I bought, and we've got out of bankruptcy from somebody else, and we've got through the chaos of the first year, and I'm looking at, for example, a long-term capital expenditure budget. It's not just the dollar and cents. It's the signal to the market, the way I see it, that we're in this business for good. And that's similar to what you just said, or the same thing as what you just said.
And you're gonna find, once you've made those the right long-term capital investments, that people are going to say, "Oh, this is going to make it easier for me to trust doing business with Scott."
Right.
And so it becomes a bit of a reputational, because larger organizations, and that's who you want to do business with, don't always want to do business with weak players because they know their own vulnerability in their own supply chain. So once you make those investments, you're going to have some doors open for you that you didn't even know about as you're sitting here today talking to me. And
Yep.
I can almost well, I will guarantee it because it will happen. And then the third test was more of a reputational one. Is, are you adding value when you make a decision? Are you adding value to all the players in the equation? Are you adding value to your clients? Are you adding value to your employees? Are you adding value to yourself? Are you, are you, or just as importantly, are you doing something that's going to hurt someone? Because your reputation becomes so important as you build out a company, particularly at this time. When I wrote this book, it was just after the 2007, 2008, around that time. And ethical entrepreneurship was important because people needed to know how to start a business and how to build a business with very little capital. When I started Calian, I started with $35 and built it up from a one-person consulting company into something big based on reputation. So if you're adding value to everybody in the equation, your reputation will grow and your word will become more of a bond. And so that too will make your world easier. And then the fourth value is just plain old-fashioned prudence. Don't be silly with your money. Don't be silly with your resources.
Right.
Don't be silly with your emotional energy, your intellectual energy. Or as I paraphrase it with one simple sentence: never buy your banker a lunch, because they make enough money, those buggers. So you
as a banker, I'm not in agreement with that advice, but
but I use
I
that
know where that's coming.
Yeah, I use that. There's all sorts of professionals around you, and they're always there for you as long as you can pay their fees. So be prudent with your money, and that's actually another acid test. If you don't know enough about law, if you don't know enough about your business, if you don't know enough about accounting, that you have to rely on outside professionals for every decision, you're probably not going to make it. Because
100%.
you better have that general understanding of everything in your industry and everything in your business and your marketing and all that. And I'm lucky. I was blessed. I was blessed to be a generalist. So
it's not just the money; it's that it just slows down the pace of business so dramatically that it becomes dysfunctional, right?
And it can be the money too sometimes, because they're not as funny. I was having a talk with an entrepreneur the other day, and they have a bunch of professional managers with them, and he said, "Larry, they're making decisions as a professional manager, but they don't get the business need I have. They don't understand that this is survival." And I always say that the only job a CEO has, the only real job a CEO has, is to make sure the company never runs out of cash.
Right.
But in order to do that, you have to have how many different skill sets to understand where you could be in trouble.
Everything. Yeah, you just have to.
So because go ahead. Sorry.
The skill set that you don't have is the one that's going to take all your cash. Guaranteed.
It's not what you know for sure that's going to kill you. It's what you. It's not
what you think you know to be true.
But you know for sure that isn't so. That's
exactly.
Yeah.
So honesty, long-term thinking, adding value, and prudence. That is the four values that are the heart of the book.
Yeah.
The Ethical Entrepreneur. And you just reviewed those. I just want to dive in, if you don't mind, a little bit more deeply onto each one, because this show is called the Winning Momentum Podcast. And it's the idea here, Larry, is that in the US last year, there were 6 million new businesses started every month. Okay. Which is double the pace from 4 or 5 years ago. And I think a large driver of that is social media. It's just cool to be an entrepreneur these days. Don't work for the man. Be a number one. Take over your life, right? But what people don't tell the younger generation that want to move into entrepreneurship, which seems to be everybody these days, they don't tell them how hard it is. And the truth of the matter is that 90% of those businesses never, ever, ever pay their founder a living wage, ever. And 98% of those businesses never create what you've created, which is intergenerational wealth the ability to retire. You could take a paycheck out, you could eat, pay your mortgage, but you don't create any wealth out of the venture. Only 2% of new businesses create any wealth. So the whole idea of this content is maybe we can change those odds a little by providing a methodology, strategies, skill sets,
Oh
frame of
wow!
mind, and
What a wonderful project, Scott. I'm so happy to be a small part of it. That's fantastic. That is a really noble cause, Scott, and you should
well.
be proud.
Thank you. And the four values that you've highlighted to me are your approach to doing exactly that. Right?
Yep.
That's how you've overcome those odds, which is why I just want to dive a little bit deeper, if you don't mind. So on the honesty front, I tell the story. I maybe haven't told it for a long time, but I've always been. I'm an accountant. I've always been a relatively honest person. I always thought, and I've been a bit of a salesperson as well. So there's always this, am I being honest, or am I pushing too much, or stretching the truth? Am I faking it till I'm making it? All that sort of stuff. And I remember distinctly years, like decades ago, I was on a boys' golf trip in Florida, and I'm a terrible golfer. And I just made a decision. I want to try and see what happens if I'm just dead honest with myself. Forget about the other people. But I'm not going to take the gimme putt. I'm not going to take the mulligan on the back nine. I'm not going to improve my lie. I'm just going to be dead honest within the rules about this. And I did that. I said, and it worked out well the first game. I mean, my score was horrible. My score went up 10 strokes, right? But I tried that. And then it worked out well for me. So I tried it for the whole year. And again, it was more about me not lying to myself, is what I was thinking about this, facing reality. And it changed my business career, Larry. And I can't even, maybe that was coincidental. Maybe I was at the point where my career was going to take off anyways, because I sort of crossed that experience threshold. But maybe it's not a coincidence. And definitely a large part of my career success has been honesty and trust, how other people perceive me. And I think
I'm going to add a little color to what you say, because I took on. I'm not a very good golfer either, but I learned how to use it as a business tool. Because when I'm out golfing with someone who I'm thinking about being in business with or doing something with, I learn some important things about that chap in 3 hours or 4 hours that I might not learn in 10 years in business. First of all, I quickly learn if they can count. I quickly learn how they deal with success. I quickly learn how they deal with failure. And I quickly learn if they have a sense of humor. And if they fail any of those items in my mind, then I have to ask more questions. And that you're right. You're absolutely right on. It is a mindset of so someone you probably didn't even realize it, but my father-in-law told me this, bless his soul, before he passed. He used the same techniques, so I stole them, and it's wonderful. So you were probably tested, Scott, and didn't even know it, and that probably led to your success.
Yeah, it was an amazing an amazing test for myself, and I just it's. When you work with troubled businesses, or you find yourself in trouble as an entrepreneur, or you find yourself in trouble in personal situations, it's tempting. It's really tempting to spin, to take a different perspective that maybe isn't reality in any reasonable person's mind, and to convince yourself that you're not lying, that you are being honest. And so to me, it's always about me. It's always about a check on myself. And I'm just telling you, in my view, that's been a huge part of.
And you have to have a certain amount of
my success.
Yeah, and Scott, you have to have a certain gentle narcissism in your soul if you're going to be an entrepreneur, if you're going to be a CEO, because the company has to be me. You have to take it personally. It has to be.
Well, to that point, so my one question I wrote down on honesty is, you talk in the book about aligning your personal values with your corporate values when you're an entrepreneur. Can you talk about that, please?
Yeah, because I do make we all make mistakes in our personal life. One of the questions that I always ask somebody when I was employing people. I'm happy I'm not employing anyone anymore. One of the questions I used to ask is, what is the biggest mistake you've made? And you could learn a lot about a person about that mistake. But what it also showed me is that, I've can you be honest about your personal mistakes? Can you be honest about
Right.
things that didn't work? I'm on to, I've gone through 2 marriages. I can go back and, when I ask somebody what their biggest mistake would be, I'd always say in business. So I've categorized the mistakes I've made in business, and I've also categorized the mistakes I've made in my personal life. And I think they have to go together. You have to think long term when you're you have to be honest. You have to think long term. You have to, if you're in a partnership, if you're in a relationship, you have to add value to the other person in the relationship. Like I said earlier, you have to
Right.
be with your intellectual and your emotional resources. So I think it crosses over so easily, and it becomes a pattern that becomes integrated.
It becomes a habit, which is where we started with that.
It becomes
Exactly.
a habit.
So this long-term thinking, um, so many entrepreneurs never have the time to reflect, to think, to do anything other than put out a fire, right? And when I deal with companies in transition, and what I mean by that is I deal with troubled companies, but I also deal with very high growth companies like your world, because it's the exact same set of issues. It's chaos needing a little bit of order put to it. And how did you, as a CEO, remove yourself from purely firefighting into longer term thinking? How did you handle the pressures of that?
I took a vacation. I would isolate myself from the business completely for a week.
Okay.
Every major decision, when I decided to take the company, it was time to take the company public. When I started the company in 1982, one of my missions was to take the company public within 10 years. 10 years later, fortunately, it all lined up that we could go public. But I had to make that decision. It was time. When I had to decide not to sell the company back in 1986, I took a vacation. Because these are major decisions. And what I would do is I'd categorize decisions in the following way. Will I remember this decision in 20 years? And if I'm going to remember that decision in 20 years, I'm going to do everything I can to give myself the time and the space to make that decision right. Because that's a decision, if you make wrong, will crush you. How many people sold their companies too early because they got attracted by the cash flow or something like that? How many people went into a market that they didn't really understand, and it was a big commitment from their organization, and they applied too many resources to that marketplace and got skinned? So I call it a 20-year test. If you're going to remember a decision in 20 years, please pay attention to it, and also when you
and give yourself the space.
And give yourself the space. And I've made some of my biggest decisions on vacations, ski vacations, or just whatever, just away from, because you have to work on the business as well as in the business. And working on the business is when you get to think about the strategic issues related to growing that company. And it starts right at the beginning. Are you in a growing market? I always advise new people who are starting in their own business. Are you swimming with the current? Is the market going to be forgiving for you? Because you're going to make mistakes, but are you in a market that's growing so that if you make a tactical mistake, you can recover easy and jump on the next opportunity?
You get a lot more lucky if you're where the energy is.
And like I said, flowing with the, going with the current. And I started Calian in 1982. The IBM PC was introduced in 1981. And I rode the technology services sector for the next 20 years because the whole world changed. And I was lucky enough. I always say building Calian was simple. It wasn't easy, but it was simple because I just adhered to the 4 rules. I worked my ass off 18 hours a day, and I took the time to evaluate when I had to make major changes in personnel, in market direction, and what have you. And the market took care of the rest because the world was changing right in front of me. Opportunities were coming up that I had no idea were there.
Yeah. When it comes to adding value, you had put in the book a provocative sentence, I thought. You should only make money for what you do and not what you know.
Yeah, business is a verb. It's
And
not a noun. Yeah, or not an adjective.
yeah, and if you know something that will help another, it is usury to charge them for that knowledge unless you are adding value as well.
Yep.
As a professional, I wasn't sure if I was taking objection to that or not, but I think I understand your point.
Well, I was in the service business. Right? I was in the service business.
Yeah,
So my job, and I wasn't the person providing the service by the time it built.
it got to that
My first year
level.
sales were
Yeah,
47,000. Second year sales were 100,000. I was still in the business. By the time I got around to year 4 or 5, the sales were up to 4 or 5 million, and I wasn't
yeah,
doing contracts myself. And within 10 years,
right.
we're 35 million. So when I had a relationship with someone, if I knew something that could make that business person better, I'd share it with them. I'd energetically share it with them. And if it could help, and that's when it comes back to you as a CEO. It
Yes,
comes back to you because 5 years later, that person might feel obligated, might feel that he wants to open the door to you to something that you hadn't seen. So that's what I meant by that. It's don't try and grab every nickel you can. I used to have a phrase that when I started Calian as a one-person consulting company in the tech services sector, there were 5 other people that started companies at the same time, and they're all probably, I don't know where they are now, but they didn't blossom. And I always used to joke that they were too greedy to make any real money.
right.
They weren't building a business; they were trying to make that living that you
It's
talked
more
about.
manipulative, right? That sort of mindset
Yeah, I want to
in,
make a nickel on everything I do. I did.
instead of having that
I
long
wanted.
term
Yeah, we
approach
wanted
to
to add
creating
value.
value.
And I'm
Yeah,
so proud of Calian because it's now running about 700 million dollars a year in revenues, and they still have that attitude.
is it?
Yeah, it's amazing. The culture, they've had a succession of brilliant CEOs. I always used to joke. I always tried to hire people that were much smarter than me around me as I
Yep.
was building the company. Until one day, I stopped saying that. When one day they came into me and said, "Larry, that's not all that hard."
Yeah, exactly.
But they've had really good CEOs. The two CEOs that followed me are, ultimately brilliant, value-added people who continue to grow the company. So and I'm not even on the board anymore. I'm just a happy shareholder who collects his dividends. So
Good for you. That's a great story. Your last value was prudence, and I took note that you went out of your way to explain that prudence is not caution. And it reminded me of one of my pillars is positivity. And I spent a long time thinking about positivity, why that works, why it's so important, why everybody talks about positivity. And what I concluded it is it's not about positivity at all. It's about not being negative because it's negativity that breeds fear, that freezes people, that manifests itself in stress and unhealthy personal relations and all of these negative things. And positivity is, in fact, a mitigation strategy for negativity in my mind.
Scott,
Okay,
you're so right on that. I used to have you're always going to end up feeling afraid at some point, or apprehensive. And so I would
exactly.
say, what would I do if I wasn't afraid? And exactly what is it that I'm afraid of again? So I could dig deep into that. What is it that's causing me the fear? Because I'm naturally a very positive. I call it the space cadet and the street fighter, which I also refer to in the book. You need those two personality traits: a space cadet dreamer,
Yeah,
positive person all the time, and a street fighter who, I think I say in the book, throws nickels around like they're manhole covers. And you need those two. As a company grows bigger, you need much less of the space cadet. But when you need you need that space cadet when you want to go into a slightly different business, when you want to do something that you haven't done before. You have to have that personal belief in yourself and your organization that you can actually accomplish something. And also but the street fighter has to be right behind you just in case you made a mistake. because you are going to make mistakes along the way and you have to be able to recover. And the ego part, you got to be able to remove the ego. You can't be committed. You got to be committed going into an idea. But if the evidence is overwhelming that you messed up, you can't let your ego get in the way to back away from it and change it, cut it, drop it. And so you're hitting.
That's the heart of my business right there, is turnaround business. Entrepreneurs, leaders that can't accept failure, that it was them that made the wrong decision or didn't execute well. And then confirmation bias sets in. They just can't admit it. And so they have to be removed from the equation for that particular transition to happen. That's just you're every day in my life.
I say that in a slightly different way. Is I want to work with people who can admit failure. That's why I ask that question when I hire someone. What's the biggest mistake you made? And
right.
A lot about a person when if they shuffle around and look down and look around and can't come up with. I mean, I can list my biggest mistakes, right down to the penny, almost. And but people and why? Because what did Einstein say? You find someone who's never made a mistake, you'll find someone who's never done anything. So you can't be afraid of that.
Just before we got on air here to shoot this, I put out a TikTok or a 1 minute short, and I was trying to explain in this very short period of time that if you imagine you're playing a game of chess, yet every piece has the capabilities of the queen. It can move anywhere and do anything. How boring would that game be? And how quick would that game be over? Like everybody would just wipe everybody out in a very short period of time, and that would be the end of it. The game is created by the limitations. And it's the same in life. It's the limitations that are the process. Otherwise, we wouldn't have anything to do. And the limitations in life and business are failure, because that limits our course of action, and values, because they limit our course of action. It is the process. We have to embrace those failures, as you were saying. And if you can't embrace those, you haven't learned anything. That's my view.
Well, you're doomed to repeat them. And
exactly.
And accountability is so important. We in the early days of Calian, we stopped it at a certain point, but in the early days of Calian, I'd get my team together and ask them and everyone had to come up with a mistake they made that week. And so it got people comfortable.
Oh, interesting.
Talking about mistakes. It wasn't taboo.
I like that strategy. And what did we learn from that?
Yeah, and I mean, cool. if one of the guys is continually making the same mistake, you have to have another conversation. But
because they didn't learn. But that's the what did we learn from it? So last thing on Calian and that entrepreneurial experience, I just want to talk about your acquisition strategy and how that fits into building a business or doesn't fit into building a business. And before you dive on that, I will remind you and tell this story for the audience that I started in 1994 a corporate finance boutique firm in Ottawa by the name of Merchant Capital, which I sold in 2005 after some success, and did a lot of VC deals in Ottawa, small stuff back in the mid-90s.
94?
I hung my shingle in late 94.
Okay.
And sold in 2005. But I was out of Ottawa by then. But I bet you we did, in 2-3 years, we did probably 80 small VC deals as a intermediary. And Ottawa was hopping in those days. They weren't all in Ottawa, but a lot of them were. And I was selling a company because I grew up in the M&A world. And so when you sell a business, when you come from the investment banking side that I come from, you rely heavily on a process, an M&A process. And to do that, you write a confidential information memorandum, a SIM, and you say, here's the company. And, there's a teaser letter and a database to precede that. And then you get some interested parties, you sign an NDA, you have a SIM, and it says, here's what's going on. Like, this is the company, here's how we're going to sell it, put your bids in, and we negotiate from there. And here's the timelines. And the whole intent of that in the process is to communicate that A, this is real, and B, there's a process, and you get to choose whether you want to participate or not. And so Calian was a bidder of about 4 or 5, as I recall, on one company that I was selling. And so I was a youngster back then. You will probably not remember, but I remember because who are these Calian people, this public company? And so we had a few bids in, but I went to meet your team, and I feel like there was 8 people or 10 people from your company in a boardroom and me. Don't hold me to that. Maybe it was 4 or 5, but it felt like a lot at the time.
Tom Coates would have been one of them, and Jerry Johnson, and you probably remember some of those names. Yeah,
I don't remember the names, and we ended up doing a deal with somebody else. But what these guys were trying to do, and properly so, by the way, but what they were trying to do was not participate in the process, but rather just negotiate a deal, right? Because I mean, as a buyer, who the hell wants to participate in that process? And so I'm just sticking to my guns, and I know that I'm going to end up with a great deal for my client. And then you walked in the room, mostly just to say hello, I think, as the CEO chairman there. You walked in the room, and one of your executives looked at you and said, "He won't negotiate," right in front of me. And you looked at me, and then he explained why, like, he won't negotiate. And you looked at me, and you looked at him, and you almost yelled at them, and you said, "He is negotiating. Can't you see that?"
Oh, I remember that. Oh, yeah.
That is the negotiation. I don't know why you're missing that. And so anyways, Larry, as you go through life, there's those 5 or 6 lines that you pick up along the way that you always remember. And I always remember that line. That was that's on my list.
I had long since forgotten that, but I do remember we laughed about that for weeks afterwards, actually internally.
Well, that was me.
Okay.
You grew in part through acquisitions.
Yep.
How did you, as an entrepreneur? I talk with lots of young entrepreneurs, largely because of the content right now, but I also advise some and coach them. And this is always an issue. Should we buy? Should we not buy? How do we do this? How did you evaluate that as a CEO?
Well, I got very lucky. In 1984, 1985, a company called Science Applications International out of the United States, SAIC, tried to buy us. They wanted to buy us. Our sales were small, a couple $1 million, but they wanted a foothold into the Canadian marketplace. So I went through that entire process of the letters and then the negotiations and the valuations as a potential seller. And then I realized that was one of these 20-year decisions, and I declined to sell. But that was my 2-month education in acquisition strategies and acquisitions.
Right.
So I was armed with the appropriate letter, the appropriate structure, the appropriate understanding of it from a potential seller's perspective, and I used. Then there was an opportunity to buy a company called Miller Communications, and I applied all of those lessons, and I bought Miller Communications, and it was on the job training, and is the deal, and it's the important, when I mentioned earlier the narcissistic part of being an entrepreneur. When I looked at the acquisition opportunity, I would ask myself the question, why would I do that? What are the benefits to me? And by me, I didn't mean me personally. I meant the company. What are the benefits to the company? Where can we go with this opportunity? What is it that really makes sense here? And do I know enough about it? Am I thinking long term? Am I adding value? All those tests. And then we succeeded in doing 1 or 2 small acquisitions. And then in 1998, we were a $7 million, $8 million company. We had a chance to buy a company that was $21 million in revenues out west, in a company called SED Systems. And it was the same idea, except this was even more opportunistic because for a whole bunch of reasons, there was a lot of people who wanted to buy that company, but nobody wanted to leave it in Saskatoon, where it was detail. I won't get too far, but we did what other companies wouldn't do, and agreed to to everything that the government of Saskatchewan wanted us to do. And they just made the deal easy for us. So opportunistic, jump in, but always ask yourself the question, why would I do that? Um, and just, and the more confusing a deal can be, probably the better off for the buyer if you keep on top of all the, you know that as a.
Exactly. That's my sweet spot.
So I don't know if I had a methodology, Scott, but I certainly would look at it in terms of what benefits will be derived from that. And in the case of all of them, it was about the people. The president of SED became the president of Calian Technology. So because he was the highest, he was the most gifted.
And making sure, I assume, that they fit with your core values and think the same way.
And they did. None of them never made through that. They all thought the same way that I did, and so the values were good. The one bugaboo that I've seen when I studied acquisitions, the one that seemed to screw the companies up the most often, or the people up, is when they couldn't integrate the information systems. If the information systems in the companies were not a ready fit for each other, then you're going to have trouble. Because
I mean, that's the nuts and bolts of the integration is a big issue. Culture is a big killer. Or CEOs that are just acquiring to bolt onto a platform because they think the market will reward them, and that's what they're doing. Aurora Cannabis announced their earnings last week, and they were 220 million, I think, of net revenue for the year ended June 2022, and they lost 1.7 billion on that revenue, of which 1.2 billion is an intangible asset write-off, which is all acquisitions, obviously, right? So that they were just throwing crap onto the platform because the market would reward them for a little while, and it came home to roost.
Yeah. Well, the magic word is accretive, and so you always sometimes it wasn't possible, but most of the time you wanted something to be accretive, and I always wanted the management team that would stay. And they could fit into our organization, and so we got lucky. I mean, there was a couple that didn't work out for us, but fortunately there were smaller ones, and we could roll them in. But you just hit the nail on the head. We just rolled their contracts in, as opposed to as opposed to having a real strategic issue with what the people could do and where the company could take it. Was just about the contracts, and they were always not as rewarding. And little not as rewarding for us, and definitely not as rewarding for the seller, because they didn't get a chance to become part of a bigger team. So
right. Let's transition into your current venture, DGov3, and maybe start, Larry, with what has driven your interest in politics and government, starting back with becoming the mayor of Ottawa, and then later in your career taking up this project?
Well, I had done everything that I had wanted to complete in business, and so I knew I needed something else. I mean, I wanted to build a company that would last forever. That was my goal, and I was comfortable that I had at least set the groundwork for a company that could go on forever and didn't necessarily want to be sold or anything, but could live on its own. So I was losing interest in the business thing. So I said, okay, politics. I was most interested in federal politics. So I thought to myself, why don't I run for the next mayor's, raise my profile? And so when the next federal election comes along, I will be able to run as a federal, at the federal level, which would be like a state senator or a congressman down in the States. But damn it, I won. And so I was really, I really didn't know a lot about municipal politics, but I sure had I had my 6 months, my 4-year MBA course in politics. And
right. I'm sure you did.
So I went through it. I got through it. It was tough. It was ugly. It was a rough run for me, because I wasn't a politician, and I probably made every mistake a politician could make in 4 short years. And same way as I did in business, I came out without an appetite for continuing in business. But I began to think, how can we make this better? Because a lot of people were saying they're not happy with the political process. That we're getting terrible politicians. The average person wasn't getting a voice in what was going on. So I had joined a group called Prior Arts, priorarts.io. And you can download a white paper on this topic from priorarts.io. And we started looking at ways of applying blockchain technology and new technologies to make the world better. How can we solve some of the world's bigger problems? And because I had been in politics, I took on the concept of politics as my as an idea. How could we apply blockchain? How could we apply smart contracts? How could we apply AI? How can we apply some of these new technologies to make the political process better for the average citizen?
So this Prior Arts, is this a business? Is it a not-for-profit? Is it a movement? This wasn't clear to me.
Prior Arts is a for-profit organization.
Okay.
DGov3, which we have spun off from Prior Arts, which I'm now completely committed to, is a not-for-profit, nonpartisan organization. But I managed to convince the people in Prior Arts that this is too big a potential opportunity for us to try and make turn. This shouldn't be about making money. This should be about creating a better governance process. So what we did is we focused on how do we merge direct and representational democracy together in a way that makes sense. Direct democracy doesn't work. You can't let the people make all the decisions, because the people will get swayed by what they had for dinner last night, and they don't have the time to dig into the issues. So using some of the new tools that we have that we didn't have 20 years ago, we could go now and elect people to become our representatives. They can be the trustee of our vote, or they could be the delegate of our vote at the municipal level or at some other level. And they can do everything that they would normally do after, from the time that John Locke wrote his Treaty of Representational Democracy in 1670. Life hasn't changed since then for any democracy. But this time, we can say, under certain circumstances, we can go back to the people in a certain constitutional manner. We can send a message back to the people that and give them an option of 2 or 3 things that the representatives aren't agreed upon. And the people could vote. And in that feedback loop, we could alter the weight of the representative's vote in his political organization based on the support he has from the people on that specific issue. So to my layman's terms, is that effectively turning everything into a referendum? No. Is because a referendum, it is a very clearly defined direct democracy, where when you're setting up the constitution for an organization, because referendums haven't proved to work very well either.
Well, that's where I'm heading. Yeah,
they get hijacked by different. You're in a democracy. You're always sort of weighing the will of the majority versus the protection of the minority. So you have to. So those are the sorts of things that you have to weigh in a democratic system. But in certain circumstances, let's just give an example. You have 10 people on your city council. 9 of them don't want to buy the fire truck because they're too conservative and cheap. 1 person wants to buy a new fire truck. You go out to the people, and 90% of the people want to buy that new fire truck, and they're willing to pay for it. That one rep's vote is now worth 90% of the votes at council. And you can do all that in an immutable fashion through the blockchain. You can do it in a way that it's not interfered through by any other, by any outside organization. You can tie it down pretty tight. So that is a concept. Now, it's early days. We have just started this program. I can't tell you it's going to work or not, but we've created this organization called DGov3, and I'm more excited about this than I've been excited about anything since I started Calian. We are going to start.
So Larry, what specific problems does this solve in our current system in either country? And I know that you listed those in your white paper, but if we could
the
Just
influence of lobbyists.
yes,
As soon as a rep gets elected, he starts to lose touch with the
constituents.
people who elected him, and he's
Yeah,
influenced more by the lobbyists and maybe by other, maybe trade-offs and things. Now, where we are looking at this right now is at the lowest possible level of governance: municipalities, student unions in colleges, maybe in unions themselves. Uh, we have a lot of work to do, but we're starting an organization to do research into how to apply technology to make democracy better for everyone. That includes the ordinary people, maybe the representatives too, because they'll be held more accountable now to the public on certain issues. Defining what those issues are, that's going to be the riddle, because you can't you can't let, how do you say this in the appropriate way? Uh, the people have to be well informed before they make a decision about what decision they're making. So this isn't going to be every issue that comes across the representative's plate that you send out for direct democracy. This is going to be one where maybe it's a 20-year decision. Are you going to put in an LRT system? Are you going to
yeah,
close down something? Maybe the 20-year test is going to come to this. I'm using my 4 principles again as I look at this project. And so far, we've got a couple of universities behind us. We have a couple of
really.
corporations are behind us. We're just at the early days. By November, we want to be able to push the start button to examine in a very thorough fashion what technology can do. And DGov3, that white paper I sent you, is one example. What can technology do to make our democratic process feel and be fairer? Because I think a lot of people are losing confidence. They're starting to become uncomfortable. I think
Well,
somebody I
I
know
think they
recently
should
said
be.
that he thought all politicians were crooks or dishonest or something like that.
That
And
might have been me.
that could have been you. And that's
No,
unfortunate.
I think the system is corrupt. I'm not pointing fingers at an individual,
Yeah.
and particularly in the U.S., by the way. Um,
The
uh,
system needs to be, and we need to be able to have these big discussions. How can we alter the system slightly? Because I'm a big believer in the U.S. Governance system. I mean, it is truly beautiful, for a sovereign state. I love it. I think it's great. But are there places we can make some small modifications so that the people feel more involved on certain issues that are important to them? Um, I
I
think the
think it
answer is
comes
that.
back to
I
your.
hope the answer is yes, but we need to prove it. We need to. There's a PhD thesis in here somewhere.
I think the issue with the system right now is the lack of honesty and disintegration of all institutions, and the idea people just don't believe in the vote,
No.
right? No matter who wins, it's not just a left right. Like if the right wins next election, the left are going to say the vote was
So there's a
corrupt,
phrase in blockchain
and vice
technology.
versa.
Yeah, there's a phrase in blockchain
Mhm.
technology called immutable. Can't be changed. It's transparent. It's immutable.
Right, right.
There's only 2 things in this world I really believe in: pleasure and math. And the blockchain technology provides you a basis, a mathematical basis
So,
for having
so
elections.
explain in layman's terms for people the blockchain and smart contracts, if you can, please.
Well, the blockchain is a distributed network that allows you to make I'll use crypto. I'll use a Bitcoin because that's the easiest way to.
Yes,
So I can take a Bitcoin and transfer it to you, Scott, on this distributed network where there's no central source of control. It's distributed all over the world. 20,000 computers are involved in making this decision. There's no single point of failure. There's no single point of control. But I can transfer a crypto to you, and within a half an hour, every computer in the world knows that I've transferred that crypto coin, that Bitcoin, to you. And there's nothing else that can be done about it. And the blockchain is a record of that transaction in a what they call a distributed autonomous organization, which is basically something that lives on a blockchain. you could have a vote for something. You could let the people vote with their cell phones, and that vote is immutable and buried inside the blockchain and cannot be touched. It cannot be altered. It cannot be
it can't even be reversed. Like it's
and it can't be reversed. Can't be reversed. So there's a lot of promise here. There's no guarantees. There's a lot of promise here that the metaverse, the Web3, blockchains, and some of these things you hear people throwing around like NFTs. They're just not all cartoon pictures. There are certain things that can be done with these technologies that people are just starting to waken up to. And my focus and our focus is, how do we do it in the world of democratic governance? Because that's important.
And I would urge people to, as they're thinking about this, you need to separate out the application from the technology. So Bitcoin is the application, one application of many for a blockchain technology. And you could believe Bitcoin's going to zero or not. It doesn't change the fact that blockchain is the technology behind it that makes that a secure, tradable.
It'll be a secure zero.
Security. Yeah, exactly.
But that's the point. The people are just starting to now realize that cryptos and these pictures that people are selling in NFTs. The real power of this is the blockchain, and now people are starting to build up organizations. I think it's Wyoming has now created a center of excellence for blockchain technology, and they're actually saying you can start a company in Wyoming and have it registered as not resident in the legal system, but resident on a blockchain, which is quite interesting, fascinating.
So when it comes to democracy and voting, it seems to me, I'm going to try and say this without getting my channel completely banned from all platforms. It seems to me that the flaw with electronic voting systems is twofold. One is that no one believes that they're not hackable. And I don't mean like breaking into the software or hacking it, although that could be true, but that at the front end or in the middle or in the rear end somewhere at the end of that process, there's some sort of manipulation of the process, and there's no audit trail. So there's no visibility as to what the hell is going on inside the black box, which feeds the first problem. And so whether you believe an election is fair or whether you believe it's corrupt, if people are looking at this black box and they can't get visibility and they can't audit anything by definition, you're never going to have the confidence of the people that use that system. So first of all, and then I think the blockchain fixes both of those problems. First of all, for a fact, it's not hackable. And second of all, it's a complete audit trail from start to finish. Am I right about that?
You're absolutely right, which is why, our group has such great hopes. But right now they're hopes. We need to do research. We need to have use cases because this is a brand new area. The concept of creating a hybrid direct representative democratic election process wasn't possible 20 years ago because we didn't have the technology.
Yes.
And the possibility of doing that in a way that's not corruptible, that is verifiable, transparent, and cannot be monkeyed around with, is something that we couldn't do 20 years ago. So why aren't we as a society investigating this? So that's why we've turned DGov3 into a not-for-profit, nonpartisan organization, and we're starting to attract a lot of interest. We all have hopes, and like any research and any development program, we need more partners. We need more people involved. We have some corporations in the network business and in the blockchain business that are jumping out alongside us. If you jump on priorarts.io, that's our website. You can download our white paper. If you want to jump in and be a volunteer, there's also a place to apply there. But this is going to be fun, and
so sorry, just before we lose that. So that's Prior Arts, PRIORARTS.io. And I looked at that site before I jumped on here, so that definitely works. PriorArts.io, and there, I think under the democracy or voting section or something, there is a white paper that you can download. Yeah. And And just before I leave this topic, Larry, and we're at the top of the hour here now. The flip side to what I said about integrity in the system and an audit trail is the flip side to that, not that we would lose anonymous voting by definition.
Well, there's something called zero knowledge tokens that allow you to make a vote securely and confirm the vote and have the person who voted completely invisible to anyone. There's so much science
so that can be done
right now. There's zero knowledge tokens are spectacular. There's universities and scientists all over the world working on how to make this a reality.
That's a fascinating area for sure.
It's going to blossom. There's a reason that Facebook changed its name to Meta, because the metaverse is going to change the whole world, and in very practical ways. And we're just getting to that point where the practicality of it is starting to become, obvious. And so we're just taking a tiny little bit of that.
I can send my icon in to vote.
I don't
in the metaverse.
Yeah.
Larry, we're the Winning Momentum podcast. As I said before, the idea here is things are going well. The idea behind the momentum is me for 30 years working in troubled businesses and wondering to myself, when is a business not troubled? When is this, when is this over? And is it when we're making money? Is it when we're breaking even? And what I've arrived at is that everything in life is about momentum. And it's when you wake up in the morning and things are a little better than they were yesterday. You just know that with confidence. That's a positive momentum. And when that happens, it attracts energy, it attracts human resources, it attracts capital resources. And so I ask everybody, I would like to ask you 1, 2, or 3 strategies to create positive momentum, either in your personal life or your business. When things aren't going the way you think, how do you turn that around?
Yeah, I think what you just said is
nothing, want them to go.
Yeah, I think what you just said is nothing succeeds like success. And once you have a successful, that positive momentum, depending upon, I made some political mistakes, and one of our prime ministers called me into his house, and he said, "Larry, I've been in politics for 40 years. He says, I just learned one thing: when you're up to your neck in shit, don't open your mouth. You won't like the taste." And so you have to get to the point where you understand you're in trouble. And then I think it's just the hard work of, for me, it would just be the hard work of understanding, being honest about why I'm there, trying to think about what the long-term solution is to get out of it. How am I going to add value to people who are going to help me get out of it? And what's the least expensive way of getting out? So I'd apply my 4 rules. But the other thing is I'd keep a positive attitude. It's everything we talked about today. You just have to apply it. And my definition of success is when you've built a company, if you believe it has the culture that it wants to go on forever, independent of your input, that to me is a success.
I agree. I mean, that's the definition of value right there.
Yeah.
Transferable value. Anything else we want to cover?
No, you've covered. I don't know who's going to listen to an hour and an hour of this conversation, but thank you very much for having me on, Scott. I appreciate it. It was fun, and good luck.
It was a lot of fun. It was great to have you, Larry. How and why should people reach out to you? If you want people to reach out to you.
Anybody who wants to reach out to me, they can go in through my LinkedIn, or they get Larry at LarryO'Brien.net. Larry at LarryO'Brien.net. I've still got a few copies of my book. If anyone here, hold on. I still have a few copies of my book. I don't think they're in print anymore, but you can download it for free. That's much better. You can download that for free off of Amazon. But if anybody wants to talk about anything, then I'm always available. I love helping entrepreneurs, and I love talking to people who are trying to solve problems. So Larry at LarryO'Brien.net. All
right, everybody. Thank you for listening. This has been the Winning Momentum podcast with my special guest, Larry O'Brien. Larry, thank you so much again. It's been a lot of fun. Thank you for listening, and we will see you next week.